afternoon.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Evolutionary Robotics. Just as a reminder at the beginning of class, please check yourself off as present with whatever device you like. And then once you have, please stow your devices unless you're annotating a tablet flat on the desk. Thank you, please, and thank you. Okay, as promised, at the beginning of every class, we will review from the schedule where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. Last time, I walked you through logistics of the course, how everything runs, expectations. I got all the undergraduates started on assignment 1, and grad students, you are now hopefully making your way through assignments 1 and 2. Any questions about the assignments?
Yes. A quick clarifying question.
Sure.
So it goes to the Reddit page, which has like steps A through Q or something.
Yes.
And those are not one-to-one mapped. Q is more than 10. So in the Brightspace assignments,
got it.
You dictate like which parts on Reddit should be completed.
Yes.
And it's for undergrads like A and B.
It's quite confusing. So
Okay.
let's start from the top. So Brightspace will take you to a Google Doc, and whatever's in that Google Doc, that's assignment 1. So assignment 1, there's a link to assignment 1 from Brightspace for both undergrads and grads. That will take you to a Google Doc, and the Google Doc will assign you more or less of some of the material from the subreddit. So the numbering and lettering that you see in the subreddit, number 1 in the subreddit doesn't necessarily mean assignment 1. Brightspace will tell you what assignment 1 is, what assignment 2 is, and so forth. Make sense? I know it's a little confusing to put all these pieces together. The reason why is there are online students that are just following the subreddit at their own pace. All good? Any other questions about that? Okay, maybe a little bit of orientation for the first few assignments is in order. As I promised you last time, what you're going to be doing over the next 10 weeks is writing some code that's a little bit like Russian nesting dolls. On the outer surface, we have an evolutionary algorithm that's going to search over the space of all possible virtual robots that may do a better or worse job of solving whatever problem you want them to do. That's the AI part. That evolutionary algorithm is watching a physics engine, and inside that physics engine is one or more virtual robots, and each of those virtual robots is made up of a number of pieces, and you're going to spend the first few assignments building a virtual robot in a physics engine. You're going to be building up those pieces. So what are the pieces? The first piece is what's referred to as links. And this is a very confusing term. Typically, you might think of a link as something that connects together body parts like your elbow, your shoulder, or your knee. In the particular physics engine that we're using in this course, that physics engine refers to body parts or physical objects as links. So think sausage links, if you like. Links are connected together in the physics engine by joints. This terminology, less problematic, think knee joint, shoulder joint, elbow joint, and so on. So your robot is going to be made up of a number of links, a number of physical objects. Those links are connected together by joints. If you make something in the physics engine that's just a collection of links and joints, you have a Raggedy Ann doll. You have something that isn't animated at all. It's a mechanical mechanism. It's not yet a robot. What else do we need to put in to make a robot a robot? What are we missing? Yeah, we'll get to this in a moment. What else do we need besides this? We need movement, which is going to be provided by motors. And your robot is going to be autonomous. It's going to decide how to actuate or how to supply electricity to its motors in order to move. And it's going to base its actions on its... What else are we missing?
You have some sort of sensors.
Sensors. So in the very first assignment, you're going to be creating the physics engine itself, and then you're going to be populating this physics engine with a number of links, physical objects, connect those physical objects together with joints, and then you're going to be adding On top of this system, a number of sensors and motors. Someone was pointing at their temple before. There's 2 more things that we need that you'll be doing in assignments 4, 5, and 6, is adding neurons and synapses. So we're borrowing a little bit of terminology from neuroscience. All of the building blocks that make up your are made up of neurons and synapses. Same thing. Your robot is going to have a number of neurons and synapses that form connections between the robot sensors to transform incoming sensory information into actions that are sent to the motors that cause the robot to move. So if you get a little bit lost or disoriented in the first few assignments, you can pull back to this 10,000-foot view. This is what you're doing in the first few weeks. Question?
Wait, so the submission for assignment 1, is it not just like getting, like how many of these are we doing in assignment 1?
None.
Okay.
This is what's on the inside of your Russian nesting dolls. All of this makes up 1 or more robots that operate inside the physical simulator. A note about the particular physical simulator that you're setting up in assignment 1. We're using Pybullet in this course. We used to use a few years ago Open Dynamics Engine, or ODE. Before that, we used yet another physics engine. Physics engines come and go. They have their pros and cons. There's a particularly awkward part of Pybullet that we'll get to when we start talking about when you get to implementing joints in assignment 3. And I'll take a little bit of time out in a Tuesday lecture to talk about that. Any questions about assignment 1, assignment 2? Off to a good start? Okay. The nice thing about Pybullet is it's got a relatively straightforward installation process. Hopefully most of you have managed to install Pybullet. Nodding heads. Okay. Anyone struggling with installation issues yet? Not yet? Okay. If you do, every year it turns out that there's a few students that just happen to have an unlucky combination of operating system, version of that operating system, compiler. Something happens where we struggle with getting Pybullet installed on your machine. So again, please make sure that you've installed Pybullet sooner rather than later. So if you do get stuck, you can come and see Anna and/or myself on Monday, and we can try and get you over the installation hump. And then once that's done, then you get to move on to the more fun stuff. Sound good? Okay. All right, so that's assignment 1 and possibly assignment 2. Today we will finish up lecture 1, and then we'll move on to lecture 2, a very, very short history of AI and robotics. I'll post today's quiz later today. I'll also post the recording of today's lecture as usual. I forgot to put up today's required reading. I'll put that up when I get back to my office right after class. There was a short segment on the BBC this morning about evolutionary robotics. Have a listen if you're interested. And you're working on assignment 1, or you're working on assignments 1 and 2, which are due at 11:59 p.m. this coming Monday. All good? We're all oriented? Okay. All right. Last time in lecture 1, we were working our way through at least some of my reasons why you might want to try and create robots. And again, I encourage you to come up with your own reasons. One of the things I think is so exciting about robotics and AI is it might help us finally define a guiding theory for intelligence. What actually do we mean by intelligence? It's been argued for almost 70 years now that if we actually really knew what we meant by this word intelligence, we could formally define what it means. And for the computer scientists in the room, you know that if we can formally define something very well, we can usually turn it into code. We're still struggling with this definition. Hopefully some of you will be a part of that journey. Okay. All right. Another reason why you might want to study robotics is you could end up on the evening news. So an undergraduate who took this class 8 years ago, Sam Kriegman, after the course finished, ended up staying on and being my PhD student. We worked together for 5 years. He worked on a number of projects, including the Xenobots. After we published on the xenobots, he went on to do a postdoc at Tufts University and is now a professor at Northwestern University working on evolutionary robotics. This was partway through his PhD, which you may or may not be able to hear.
Robots can reproduce. It's actually happening at a lab near Boston, Massachusetts. For tonight's Weekend Journal, we take you there to find out what this remarkable discovery could mean for all of us. Inside this lab at the Allen Discovery Center at Tufts University, scientist Douglas Blackiston shows me the Petri dish.
So these are frog embryos?
Where xenobots, also known as robots, live. They are robots, but not made of metal and circuit boards. And why do they call them robots when it really feels like it's just a small, very, organism?
They're robots because they're designed and engineered from the ground up to behave in very specific ways. These are a return to the original conception of the word robot, which is just a worker made out of living tissue.
Sam Kriegman is on a team of 3 other researchers who've been working on this project since 2018. A closer look through the microscope shows tiny, uniquely shaped organisms derived from one-day-old frog eggs on the move.
They are swimming around in a dish, pushing other cells into piles.
This is actually how they reproduce. A supercomputer reshapes the organisms, giving them a Pac-Man-like appearance. The manufactured mouth then collects single cells placed in the Petri dish, which eventually form into identical replicas of the original. Is it all about the shape?
Yes, everything we've done is just simply the shapes. You can imagine shape's really important. We can play with the molecular biology and the genetics as well to push the cells to do things they normally wouldn't.
These researchers believe these tiny organisms could one day do big things in the field of regenerative medicine.
So if we fully understood how cells decide to build things, then we should be able to control it, to make them build other things, to stop growth during cancer, and to restart growth to regenerate limbs or other organs.
It's possible these organisms could even help the Earth recover from environmental disasters like oil spills.
It shows us that there are many kinds of ways that nature can be creative and reproduce itself.
How far are we away from that?
We are far away, but
How far? Will we still be here?
I hope so. That's my goal,
Yeah.
is to do something useful in our lifetime.
And the Department of Defense is funding the project. Scientists tell us the DoD funds hundreds of medical and scientific research projects each year.
Okay. Self-replicating frog bots funded by the US military. What could possibly go wrong, right? Okay. My hope for you, for some of you, is that you stay on and work on evolutionary robotics or end up working in some other branch of robotics and AI, and that you make a major discovery and you end up having to explain it live on the evening news. So that's Sam. His advisor ended up on a very different program.
To make the reproducing robots, researchers using AI and a supercomputer took stem cells from African clawed frog embryos and formed them into tiny living creatures called xenobots, which were able to move on their own, communicate amongst each other, and heal themselves from an injury, making them the first ever living robots. Which is when researchers bulldozed the lab, dropped flash grenades into the rubble, and went back to their first love, stand-up comedy. What's that? No? They kept going? Sweet. Then the xenobots would move around their environment and find single cells. They would gather hundreds of these cells at once and then assemble an offspring inside their mouth. A few days later, the offspring became a new xenobot. And that's when researchers doused the building in jet fuel, walked away from the smoking ruins, and took up selling driftwood sculptures on the beach. No? Still making them puke robot babies? Super dupe. As one of the experts working on the project, Josh Bongard, put it, we found xenobots that could walk. We found xenobots that swim. And now in this study, we found xenobots that kinematically replicate. What else is out there? A beach, a pocket knife, and your imagination. Please just think about it. We'll be right back.
Okay, I thought about it. There's some nice driftwood on North Beach. I'm not ready to retire quite yet, so let's carry on. Okay.
To make the
All right. Why robots? Maybe it'll make you famous, maybe it won't. Other reasons why we might want to make robots. We've kind of covered this already. From an economics perspective, they make a lot of sense. One of the major challenges we face at the moment, obviously, is weaning ourselves off of fossil fuel. Most of the solutions for doing so involve harvesting natural sources of energy at scale, outside in some way, right? Solar farms, wind farms, wave farms, tide farms, you name it. What do all of the solutions have in common?
Like almost all of those require underwater welding.
Underwater welding, yeah, some of them underwater. Yeah, that's not trivial.
So dangerous.
So dangerous,
It's like
right?
the deadliest job that exists.
Fixing a mechanism on a tidal farm off the shores of northern Scotland, yeah, quite the job. Okay. It obviously remains to be seen, but if we are going to try and build very large-scale infrastructure outside that is sustainable and maintainable and makes economic sense, we're probably going to have to involve robotics in some way. Either autonomous and mobile robots for maintenance and observation, or the mechanisms themselves are partly or mostly autonomous and adaptable to local changes in winds, wave, tide, sun, you name it. We'll see. Okay. We're going to zoom in now on rationales for evolutionary robotics. As I've already mentioned, robotics is a massive field, lots of different approaches out there to how to create autonomous and safe machines. We're going to focus in this course on one particular approach. We're going to try and create AI that evolves robots for us. Evolutionary robotics is a very small branch within the overall field of robotics. The prevailing approach focuses on learning. The deep learning revolution has convinced everyone, including roboticists, that that's the way. That's the way to create autonomous and safe machines. So how do we take state-of-the-art machine learning and deep learning and port it into robotics? Well, we hire some human engineers to design the body of the robot, and then drop a deep learning or AI model into the robot to serve as its brain, allow the robot to move around and do things and make mistakes. The robot's internal brain learns from its mistakes and learns what works well and what doesn't, and it learns and gets better and better and better at whatever it is we want it to do. That's the prevailing view in robotics. We're going to see quite a few examples of that in this class. But we're going to focus on something different. We're going to focus on a different adaptive mechanism. Not just on learning, we're going to look at evolution. Of course, Mother Nature does not work like this. She does not de novo create body plans like the human body plan and then optimize brains to control that body well. Mother Nature very slowly over very long periods of time and across populations, carefully tinkers with bodies and brains and finds combinations that work well in whatever the environmental niche is or the ecological niche is for that organism. That's what we're going to focus on. So I want you to pay attention in the first few weeks to this difference between learning and evolution. Here's my best attempt to illustrate why this second approach, focusing on evolution and not just learning, might be beneficial. For those of you that are going to tackle the differentiable physics and gradient descent method, you're going to do something like this. This little GIF here is showing you a robot that was designed not by a human engineer, but the body was designed randomly. We create a random body. And then inside that body, there's a neural network that's transforming the robot's incoming sensor values into motor commands. You can't see the sensors in this video, but you can see the motors at work. You should be able to see this flashing red and blue. Whenever one of these bars is red, it's a spring that's being compressed, or a piston that's being compressed, if you like. And whenever the bar is blue, it's a spring or a piston that's being elongated. So the red and blue is the action of the motors and the muscles that make up the robot. What you see in the top half of this GIF, this is a random brain. We've dropped a random collection of neurons and synapses into that robot that's transforming its sensory information into extensions and compressions of the springs that make up the robot's body. So far, so good? So that's the before. The bottom half is after optimization. We've asked an AI to tune or learn values or parameters for these neurons and synapses to get this thing to move to the right. It's not very efficient, but clearly it moves further to the right than the non-optimized robot above. So this is a GIF that I created to try and encapsulate sort of the standard approach to robotics. Make a body, in this case we made a random body, and then use deep learning, gradient descent, backpropagation of error. Those terms don't mean anything to you at the moment, that's okay. State-of-the-art AI to tune the brain of the robot to get it to do something we want it to do. Question?
Does the red dot on the left part have any significance? Just another.
I have absolutely no idea why it's red. Good question. No, as far as I know, no significance. Any other questions? Okay, so here's a robot that learns rather than evolves. Doesn't seem very problematic, no problem. Here's my GIF, again, to try and summarize the approach we're going to focus on in this course, which is not to create just one robot, but to create a population of robots. Here's a pretty modest-sized population, just 3, and you can immediately see that the bodies are different. So here's an example of 3 different robots with 3 different bodies and 3 different brains. In all the evolutionary robotics experiments we're going to see in this course, the evolutionary algorithm always works with the population of robots and is trying to improve the descendants of that population to ever more useful and safer machines.
Do you specify what kind of motor you're using?
We do specify. So in this case, we told the AI, the evolutionary algorithm, it gets to work with robots that are made up of springs, and those springs connect together small ball bearings, if you like. Doesn't really matter.
So if you if you had something that you built that was using a stepper motor,
Yes.
but a servo motor or a DC motor would work better, would it make that decision?
That's a great question. We could make available to the AI stepper motors and pistons as 2 types of building blocks. One way to think about this is like it's a huge Lego set. The AI or the evolutionary algorithm has a whole bunch of different parts and things that it can cobble together in different ways. Not surprisingly, 99.99999% of the ways you might randomly cobble things together produces a robot that doesn't go anywhere, and you'll get firsthand experience with that. But over time, if you're lucky, the evolutionary algorithm starts to discover combinations of parts that work. They could be different kinds of motors. Here, just one type, pistons. Yes, another question.
How does the algorithm determine what works? Is it how far it gets? Is it just if it moves?
Yep, great question. How does the evolutionary algorithm determine what works? We'll get into more of the details of this in a little bit later, but we're going to be using fitness functions. So one of the things the human has to do, this isn't a fully autonomous process, you have to sit down and write in code a function, and for every virtual robot, the evolutionary algorithm takes that fitness function and applies it to the robot and measures on its own, autonomously. The evolutionary algorithm measures how well the robot is doing at whatever the fitness function says it should do. What do you think the fitness function is that I used in this case? What is the fitness function measuring?
Moving across the board.
Yep, it's the X component. How positive X does this robot achieve by the end of the simulation? The fitness function is literally X. That's it. We could swap in a fitness function of minus x. And what would you expect to see at the end if we did nothing except change the fitness function from x to minus x? We're trying to now maximize minus x. You'd have robots that go to the left, hopefully. Yeah? Okay. All right, so here's the result of an evolutionary robotics approach. Here's the result of a learning approach. What's the difference? Or which one is better? What are the pros and cons here?
Evolutionary robotics, if you're not restricted, like if you're not heavily restricted in how much material you can use for a robot, evolutionary robotics produces a better body for the same result.
Great point. It could produce a better body, and you mentioned something about efficiency, right? What is a better or worse body? If we're going to actually make these things out of metal and plastics and ceramics and carbon and fossil fuels and all the rest, maybe making a more efficient, smaller body is a good way to go. And we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about exactly that. What makes for a good body plan or a bad body plan?
Is that just stuff that you would add into the fitness function?
Great question. You could absolutely add things to this to say, make a robot that moves to the right and is as small as possible, or mechanically efficient as possible, or requires the least amount of carbon to build if we were to actually go ahead and build it, assuming you have a way to estimate that. Okay. Here's a thought experiment for you. Imagine that we're hired by NASA to develop a swarm of robots or a collection of robots to go and explore the surface of Titan. We know something about the surface of Titan. There's a lot about the surface of Titan we don't understand. So NASA's brief that they give to us is, please give us a whole bunch of robots. We'll package them up in a rocket and we'll send them there. And from NASA's point of view, they're not necessarily interested in all the robots succeeding when they get there. For NASA's purposes, they only care about the quality of the best individual in the swarm. If one member of the swarm finds a little green man on Titan, that's pretty good. That's really all that matters. Doesn't matter whether two of them find it or all of them find it. We're going to go looking for stuff on the surface of an extraplanetary body, and maybe all of the robots except one are destroyed or don't work or get dust choked in the joints. Assume a lot of things are going to go wrong. We want one of them to do the right thing. So, in the traditional approach to robotics, we have this hand-designed body. So we manufacture 3 identical versions of this robot. And we're going to deploy them on the surface of Titan, and unbeknownst to us, there's a cave on the surface, and in the very back of that cave is something very, very interesting to NASA. They don't know it yet because we haven't found it. Alternatively, as evolutionary roboticists, we also supply NASA with a swarm that also has 3 members in it, but these 3 members of the swarm are evolved rather than trained. Okay, I already revealed my hand last time. You know how hopelessly biased I am, so this is obviously a cooked example. Which swarm is going to find the little green man at the back of the cave? Evolution, of course. Why? Here's Swarm 1 in action. Here's our evolved swarm in action. Why is the evolved swarm, or at least, why is at least one member of this swarm more likely to reach the back of the cave than the first swarm?
I mean, physically because it's smaller.
Physically because it's smaller. It happened to be a small cave.
It's also just because it produced different robots.
different robots. If you don't remember anything from this course, remember this. There's strength in diversity. Imagine that this isn't a cave and this red circle is not a little green man at the back of the cave. Imagine that this is a blood vessel and there is a small piece of microplastic lodged in that blood vessel. Sam was just telling you about xenobots, which are not made from inorganic materials like metal, plastics, and ceramics. They're made from frog cells, and we'll talk about the xenobots later. Since Sam's interview, last year, we published a paper on anthrobots. These are robots that are made from, not frog cells, human cells. It's possible, in the not too distant future, that we can make a small biological robot out of you and introduce it into you, assuming you're willing and interested in that. One of the challenges for robotics in general is to get places that are hard to get. The Roomba was designed so that it could drive underneath sofas, right? Not that interesting, but okay. Maybe we want to design a swarm for NASA, and NASA is in the business of deploying autonomous machines into unstructured environments. We talked about structured, semi-structured, and unstructured environments last time. There are also uncertain environments. We know a little bit about the surface of Titan, but there are other things we don't know. How much dust is there? There's wind. How much wind? What kinds of crevices and cracks exist that are very hard to see from a satellite, but become very obvious and very problematic for anything or anyone that's on the ground? This is actually a challenge for robotics and AI in general. We design and evolve and train our machines in the lab or in a controlled facility, and then we send them out into the world. It's guaranteed that those autonomous machines are going to come up against environments or things that they were never programmed or evolved to handle. That's very difficult and also really, really scary when there's humans involved. What is an autonomous machine going to do when it experiences something in the outside world that it was never programmed or trained to deal with? One of the hopes, and that hasn't been shown yet, but hopefully it will, for evolutionary robotics is that there's strength in diversity. If we deploy large numbers of these machines where no two machines are alike, they don't all share an Achilles heel. There isn't something that can bring down all the machines, and vice versa. There's a chance that one or a few of them will do what we want them to do. Great question. Can we design different bodies with traditional robotics? Can we take deep learning, gradient descent, differentiable physics, and get it to design the body as well as the brain? Was that?
That's not what I meant.
Oh, sorry.
Like human designs different bodies. Like this. Obviously, this example is entirely hooked up.
Got it. Yes.
0.3 of the same robot.
Sure. We could take the most talented human roboticists on the planet and say make 3 different designs. Possibly, but we don't really mean 3, right? For NASA, depending on the size of the rovers, if there's strength in diversity, then there's more strength in more diversity. NASA would like to diversify its portfolio and de-risk its planetary missions by sending not 3, but 3,000 or 3 million. Can't do that yet, but we're getting there, right? So there's a question of scale as well. Again, Mother Nature shows us the way, right? Every single organism on the planet is morphologically and neurologically unique. We all kind of look the same, but not identical. We're all a little bit different for very good reason. Mother Nature is very wise. What is it in nature that makes for strength and diversity? Why isn't every species genetically identical? Why aren't we morphologically identical? There's a reason, a good reason.
It's like variable conditions, material conditions?
Can you elaborate? Conditions, how so?
I mean, everywhere is different, so in order to adapt to your environment, you have to be like a little bit different.
Absolutely. Everywhere is a little bit different. And so there's a likelihood that if there's a number of members of the species within that niche, one or a few of them are going to successfully adapt to those changes. If everybody's exactly the same, and for whatever reason that particular strategy cannot adapt to changing environments, that species is in a lot of trouble, right? There's strength in diversity. 100 years ago, we came up with this brilliant idea about genetically modifying crops and deploying very huge numbers of seeds that were genetically identical. In fact, we're still doing it. Not a great idea, right? At the moment, there are untold numbers of these on the planet, and there's 3 operating systems, 4. Somebody figures out how to bring down Mac phones. We're kind of in trouble. You remember last year, there was something that brought down most of the Microsoft machines. Not such a great strategy. We seem to be stuck in this idea of making machines that are identical, that share a lot of things in common. Not such a good way to do things. Perhaps we should be developing technology in which each instance of the machine is unique. Its form and function, body and brain, are unique. They're all designed to do the same thing, in this case, go to the right, but they all do it in different ways, and that makes them robust. As a group, makes them strong. Okay, that's my best attempt to try and convince you why evolutionary robotics is a particular approach that's worth studying. Okay. We've been spending a lot of time talking about NASA. Turns out NASA actually is interested in evolutionary robotics. This is a project from about 10 years ago now to create Tensegrity robots. Okay. You can hear the NASA engineers waxing poetic about how cool Tensegrity robots are, but you should be able to probably pick up just from the videos why Tensegrity robots are an interesting type of body plan, or why NASA is particularly interested in these kinds of robot bodies. What's so great about Tensegrity robots?
They can probably navigate a lot of different terrain.
They can navigate a lot of different terrain, yeah. Although wheeled robots and legged robots are getting pretty good also at navigating rugged terrain. It packs really small. NASA cares about carrying volume. Did you have an idea?
Less material.
Less material. Somebody mentioned that already, right? Less material. They're very efficient. There's something else that's particularly desirable about Tensegrity robots that's shown in the video right here.
Wow, resilient.
Resilient how?
I was going to say maybe like unpredictable in their movements. Like
They're
leads into your diversity aspect.
Yeah, they're unpredictable in their movements, which for NASA is actually a con. NASA, for good reasons, it's a very conservative engineering firm, right? Something goes wrong on another planet, as far as we know, there's nobody there to fix it. Right? So NASA doesn't like that part so much. But they're willing to swallow that risk. They're willing to swallow that risk for the particular potential advantage of Tensegrity robots. If I can navigate my slides here. That was shown somewhere. I lost it. There.
It can withstand impacts really well.
Can withstand impacts very well. NASA likes to drop things from a height onto a surface. Very, very scary. The point of impact. The point of this video is this little sphere that you see in the center is meant to be the very expensive, very sensitive scientific instrumentation. This particular body plan happens to be very good at cushioning or reducing the acceleration and deceleration of scientific instruments. So for NASA, at least, exploring different body plans has a very practical utilitarian end. Are there safer ways we can get science onto the surface of another planetary body? Okay. I'm going to skip over this one so we can move ahead a little bit. Okay, let's get into evolutionary robotics now. We're going to switch now from the why to the how. We've already started to talk about the how a little bit, but 10,000-foot view of how to evolve robots. First thing we need to do is to create a task environment, and that's what you're going to be doing in assignments 1 and 2. You're creating a virtual world, and then you can put things in that virtual world for your robot to grapple with, sometimes literally. You then need to create the robot itself. You need to create links and joints, sensors, motors, neurons, and synapses to get that robot to do something. Inside the robot itself is its artificial neural network. And an artificial neural network, we'll talk about them in a few classes, is some combination of neurons and synapses, and then we wrap the whole thing in an evolutionary algorithm that tunes either the artificial neural network, tunes the brain, or the evolutionary algorithm also tinkers with body and brain. This is a very old evolutionary robotics experiment that I ran when I was a student. What I'm showing you here is the robot that had the highest fitness function value at that point in time in the experiment. Remember that in an evolutionary robotics experiment, at any one time, there is always a population of machines, some of which are less fit and some of which are more fit. What I'm doing to construct this video is to pull out the most fit robot from the population at every point in time, and by stitching all of those champions together, you can see in real time evolutionary progress. What was the fitness function that I used in this experiment? It's not positive X. Pick up the block. So great, we're going to use English in this class. We got to turn that English into a fitness function. We got to quantify this somehow. In this case, what I did was I asked the evolutionary algorithm to minimize the distance between this blue block and this gray sensor that's on the robot's back. You can think of this blue block as like a flashlight. It's a light source. It's emitting light. And this gray dot on its back is a photosensor. It's registering light intensity. Yeah. You can see that I relatively quickly was able to evolve a robot that maximizes this fitness function. It minimizes the difference between the blue block and the gray dot. That was actually the first part of a two-part experiment. Once a robot in the population evolved the ability to pick up the blue block, I made a modification to the robot's environment. Now this is really sped up. Every time the robot evolves the ability to grab the block and pull it onto its back, I change things. I change the environment in which these robots are evolving. What's the change that I'm making? I move the blue block a little bit further away, which means the overall fitness of everyone in the population goes down. Everybody's fumbling or struggling with the block because it's a little further away. But this population very quickly readapts, meaning that at least one machine in the population evolves the ability to grab the blue block and move it onto its back. I'm not changing the fitness function at all in this experiment. The fitness function is always minimize the distance between blue block and gray sensor, but I changed the environment a little bit. What's happening? What observations can you make about this particular evolutionary robotics experiment? I've been singing the praises of evolutionary robotics and this approach to safe and autonomous machines, but it's got its problems.
It doesn't always seem to preserve the behavior with the pincers at the front. So despite the fact that it ostensibly knows how to pick up the block, it seems to sometimes change that and not be able to pick it up.
Great point. This is a problem in all branches of AI and robotics. It's called catastrophic forgetting. A robot or an AI model evolves or learns the ability to do something, and then we slightly change what we want it to do, and it forgets how to do the original version of the task. That can be catastrophic in some cases, depending on what's happening. So you can see some catastrophic forgetting going on here. Once it solves the problem, it doesn't necessarily, the population is not necessarily able to hold on to that solution. What are some other embarrassing details that are being exposed about evolutionary robotics in this video?
It's taking the fit quite literally, so it's just putting the block on top of the sensor.
The robot says, I'm doing what you told me to do. I'm minimizing the distance. We talked about this last time. What is this called? Another ubiquitous problem in AI and robotics. Perverse instantiation. The robot or evolution is instantiating the behavior we want, minimize the distance in these machines, but it's instantiating it perversely. By perverse, it means that in retrospect, once the humans observe the machine, the humans do this. They say, oh, okay, that's not what I meant. When I set up this experiment, I wasn't anticipating that the robot would grab and throw the block onto its back. It became immediately obvious once I saw it. Classic example of perverse instantiation. Sometimes it's hilarious. Sometimes it's very, very scary. It's really, really hard to solve. You've probably experienced this with friends and family. You tell someone to do something, they go off and do it, and you say, no, that's not what I meant. Very, very hard. No one has, in my opinion, no one in AI or robotics has a good way to solve this problem yet. And it's a problem that needs to be solved if we're going to have autonomous machines working very close to humans.
So along that line, it seems like you would already put some constraints on morphology to prevent the robot from, say, just like putting the gray dot on the front and just walking into the...
Great point. So let's be proactive. Let's change the body of the robot to prevent that perverse behavior. But there's a catch-22 here. We didn't know to protect the robot against that perverse behavior until it evolved and we saw it. It's very, very hard to be proactive. We can run these experiments many, many times and keep uploading patches and fixes. There was a video going around social media yesterday about a Tesla car that was stopped at a train crossing. Did anybody see this? The train goes speeding past Tesla, and you look at the screen inside the Tesla, and it sees a whole bunch of cars, a whole bunch of automobiles in front of itself. It doesn't see a train, it sees fast-moving cars, which is actually maybe not too bad. It's kind of close to the right answer, but it's a perverse instantiation of what's going on. Very, very hard to get all this stuff right. And if we're going to deploy these machines out in the real world near humans, how do you know? How do you know that you've put a Band-Aid or patch over every possible thing that could go wrong? Very, very tricky. Okay. All right. I apologize. These slides should have been in the logistics part. I'll go through them very quickly. This is a plot I made back in 2018. Horizontal axis shows final percent grade for folks who took this class in 2018, 2017, 16, and 15. The vertical axis is the number of classes they missed. This is some data to try and convince you, come to class. Or if you, for some reason, can't come to class, make sure to watch the lectures. Okay, a little bit about who I am. You don't need to know who I am. Let's move on to expectations. I've mentioned some of this already, but just to make sure this is very clear, I'm already getting lots of feedback from you. This class is not so much fun if I just talk at you all day, every day. Please feel free to ask questions. Stop me. I'm happy to clarify anything. Common sense, you feel free to miss a few classes, no problem. Regular, not necessarily perfect attendance. For many of you who are still relatively new to coding, this class might be a lot of work. It is a lot of coding. Stay on top of it. There is no explicit incentive in this course to memorize all the key concepts that we talk about. All of the quizzes are open book. There's no final exam. But I do encourage you to try and internalize some of the key concepts in this class, like perverse instantiation, catastrophic forgetting, the 4 building blocks of evolutionary robotics. Why? Because job interviews are closed book. If you interview at Google and you can talk intelligently about perverse instantiation and catastrophic forgetting and show your interviewers on your phone what you evolved in this class, that'll probably work in your favor in the interview. Okay, you'll have lots of opportunity to be creative when you work on your final project. This course is broad. I'm going to throw a lot of terminology, things at you you may never have heard of before. There's this thing called the internet and Google. Go ahead and Google them and dig a little deeper. Okay, please maintain a positive attitude when working with me, the TA, and your fellow students. Okay, that's what the TA and I am expecting from you. What you cannot expect from me and the TA is help with buggy code. Please do not come to office hours and say, why is my program crashing? You don't know, we don't know either. We will help you with learning concepts and strategies. So if you're just stuck and you can't make any more progress on your assignments, do come to office hours. We'll help you with debugging strategies. We'll give you ideas that you can then run with on your own to solve your own problems. If something isn't installing correctly, you can definitely get some help for that. Okay, we won't help you learn Python. We will help you install software. There's some great Python tutorials out there on the web. Okay. What you can expect from the TA and myself, we can help you with specific programming questions that maybe you couldn't get a good answer to through Googling. I left this example up here. Why do I need to deallocate memory? Because this class used to be taught in C using a different physics engine. As you will see in this course, there's going to be an emphasis on concepts, specific tools like programming languages, physics engines, particular kinds of robots, stepper motors, all sorts of technologies come and go, but some of these basic concepts have staying power. Okay. Please try and look it up first if you can. Happy to go through conceptual issues. If you're particularly interested in catastrophic forgetting and you'd like to know where else in the AI landscape there are researchers struggling with this problem, come see me. I can point you to YouTube videos and papers. Happy to help you dig a little bit deeper on anything. Please do ask questions about assignments and projects. If you're confused about something in the assignments, good chance is that there's other students in the class that are confused as well. Come ask the question in class, ask the question in office hours, and we'll get things straightened out. Okay. Here's my little schematic about what we just talked about at the beginning of lecture. Hopefully this is clear now. You're starting at Brightspace. It'll take you to a Google Doc, which will take you onto Reddit. You need to upload screenshots or video to Imager or YouTube and report those results back. Okay. I talked about the final project. I'll talk about details and specific expectations about final projects later, but I wanted to give you a sense of what's possible as a final project. A few years back in 2020, I made a highlight reel of some of the most fun projects from that semester. It's going to go very quickly. I want you to pay attention to the video on the left, which shows you the robots before evolution occurred. And then you're going to see a video on the right, which is going to show you the same robot and the same virtual world, but now the most fit robot. Okay. I'm going to make a highlight reel for this semester as well. I hope to see some of your robots on it. Okay. Any questions about lecture 1 while I'm moving on to lecture 2? All good? Okay. History of AI. Here we go. AI has been running, AI as a field and robotics as a field have been running arguably since the Second World War, but you can also go much further back if you want. Lots of material to cover. There should be a course here at the History of AI. There isn't yet. So this is going to be a potted history of AI and robotics. Our collective attempts over the decades or the millennia to create or think about intelligent machines. We're going to start with this quote. Who said this? And what is it in English?
Descartes.
René Descartes, and in English?
I think, therefore I am.
Okay. Why are we starting with Descartes in a class on robotics? Seems like an odd place to start. Some of you may have studied this particular work already. This is a long argument that Descartes made to himself about what can he be sure about. I see you all out here in the world, but maybe I'm in the matrix and this doesn't all exist. Maybe you aren't all real. Maybe this isn't real. Maybe this isn't real. How far in do I have to go before I find something that's real? Maybe some of you have thought the same kinds of things. It gets a little bit problematic. Kind of hard to convince yourself with certainty that you exist. Here's Descartes' best attempt. He asked himself that question, what's real? Am I real? Do I exist? He ended up, more or less, at the end, by not being sure about a lot. But there was one thing, somewhere, somehow, that was actually asking the question. Whatever that thing is that's asking the question, that, for Descartes, was what we really mean when we use the indefinite pronoun I or me. That's the thing. Okay. For Descartes, at his time, this was the Christian soul. If you follow and agree with Descartes and you're not so religiously inclined, you might point to the mind. Doesn't really matter. There's a thing. From the Cartesian view, there's a thing that's real. This thing is real, everything else isn't. The moment you make that Cartesian distinction, and it's now called Cartesian dualism, there's something or some things that are on one side of the line. I, or maybe us, and then everything else. And for Descartes, some of that other stuff was the body. This itself is not really the thing. For Descartes, this stuff isn't the thing that's asking the question. It's some other stuff, which, again, I'm not even sure that it exists. So in the Western canon, in Western thought, about 300 years ago, a line was drawn between me or I and everything else. And once you start to think about a lot of ideas in Western thought, you can see this demarcation line between my soul and body. I've already been talking in this class about body and brain. I gave you a list of the 6 things that make up the robot. The first 4 are body, joints, links, sensors, and motors, and the other 2 are brain. For most of us in the West, we're so comfortable with this distinction, we don't even realize that we're making it. Okay, who cares? Maybe it just doesn't matter. We'll see. Another reminder is in this slide and subsequent slides from time to time, you'll see a red box appear, which on your version of the slides is empty, and on my version of the slides is filled in. This is just, again, a nonverbal prompt and a prod to make sure you remember to take notes and stay actively engaged in the course. You can annotate slides or a blank piece of paper however you like. For those of you interested in the philosophical implications or the philosophical underpinnings of AI and robotics, if you haven't read this already, I suggest you do. Okay, optional reading for this course. Okay, let's jump 200 years forward from the 1700s to the early 1900s. This should look pretty familiar to hopefully to all the computer scientists in this class. Who has not heard of a Turing machine before? Okay, there's some non-CS folks here. So in 1936, Alan Turing, one of the pioneers of computers in general, came up with a thought experiment. This was before any physical computers existed. He said, imagine a physical machine, a device, that can move back and forth over an infinite tape, and that tape is broken up into a number of sections. That's the beginning of Turing's description of his hypothetical machine. Computer scientists in the room, anybody want to have a stab at finishing that definition? We've got a machine, we've got an infinite tape. What does the machine do? It reads from the tape, that's input, or in the case of robotics, sensory input. The machine can read from the tape, which is input. It then does some internal processing. Whatever's coming in from the tape, that machine combines it with internal state stuff, numbers, a neural network, doesn't matter. It's memories, biases, hopes, dreams, you name it. Stuff inside gets mixed with stuff coming in from outside, and that combination is written by a Turing machine back onto the tape. That's the output. And for the roboticists, the tape either is moved back and forth by the machine, or the machine moves one tape segment to the left or right. That's a Turing machine. Okay. This paved the way a few years later, towards the end of the war, in physical versions of this thought experiment, things that actually did this. They read and wrote to tape, and those were the very first computers. Every single electronic device on the planet is a physical instantiation of a Turing machine. Okay. Why are we talking about a Turing machine? Turing, like Descartes, also put some lines in the sand for most Western thinkers. It's obvious that the Turing machine, or by definition, the Turing machine takes input in, does cogitation, and acts as a result. You are, hopefully, listening to my words and looking at my slides. You're taking in sensory information. You're maybe immediately forgetting it. Hopefully, it's combining with other things going on in your head. And some of you are nodding. Some of you are saccading your eyes to the slides back to me. You're doing some output. Some of you are writing onto paper or a tablet. There's some output. It's obvious, not just that this is not just how machines work, but we're like this also. It's obvious. We take in input, cogitate, and produce output, right? I see some of you nodding. You're a Turing machine, right? No one has any problem with that? Okay. All right. So with the Turing machine, this kind of led to the idea of, okay, this machine can work, and if the tape is long enough, and there's enough kinds of symbols, and there's enough complexity inside this machine, maybe this machine could actually start to act intelligently. Maybe we could create intelligent machines. Someone in 1956 actually coined a term to describe this, artificial intelligence. Let's see if we can create, in a Turing machine, intelligence. Let's create artificial intelligence. This person wrote a proposal to the government asking for money to hold a 2-month summer school in the summer of 1956 to bring some people together and do it, make AI. This is some text from the actual proposal that went out in spring of 1956 to the government. We propose a 2-month 10-man study. Of course, this is the 50s, man study of artificial intelligence. It should be carried out this coming summer at Dartmouth, just down the road from here. The study is going to proceed on the basis of the following conjecture. So this was a conjecture at the time, this idea that maybe we could make AI. The conjecture is that any aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can in principle be so precisely described. We're going to formally define every aspect of learning or being intelligent. And if we can describe it accurately enough, then I think we can probably simulate it as well. I added on here reproduce it, question mark, to highlight another distinction in AI. Maybe ChatGPT simulates intelligence, or maybe ChatGPT is intelligent. These are probably two very different things, possibly two very different things. Some folks working in AI and robotics have the more humble goal of trying to get machines to simulate intelligence well enough that they can act as useful and safe machines. Some folks think that we can actually create intelligent machines. They're not simulating it, they have it. Okay. An attempt will be made if, Uncle Sam, you give us the money to do so, to find how to make machines use language, form abstractions and concepts, solve kinds of problems now reserved for humans. We're now starting to unpack this big term of intelligence. What goes into intelligence? Well, something that's intelligent from our perspective usually is able to use language, form abstractions, do problem solving, and so on. And, also, by the way, improve itself. Something that's intelligent usually can get better with time at stuff. Okay. We think that a significant advance could be made in one or all of these problems if a carefully selected group of scientists, read that as my buddies, work on it together for a summer. Turns out they got the money, they held the workshop. This term artificial intelligence was coined by John McCarthy, and he did indeed invite his buddies to come to Dartmouth, and they worked on this over the summer. Anybody recognize any names in this list?
I took Intro to AI last semester.
Okay, that's fine.
So I recognize most of them.
Okay, give us a few, please.
Struggling to recall which ones did what.
Okay.
I know McCarthy is, at least at this point, sort of spearheading the whole thing. I believe Simon and Newell worked on some of the initial stuff for neural networks.
They worked on, most of the folks on this list worked on something that looked like a neural network. You mentioned Herb Simon, who's on this list somewhere. If you've ever taken a class with Professor Skalka here at UVM, Professor Skalka was Professor Simon's very last grad student. So if you know Chris, ask him some stories about Herb. Other members of this team, as we already mentioned, John McCarthy actually invented the word AI. Marvin Minsky went on to co-found the AI lab at MIT. The AI lab at MIT is often seen as Mecca for things AI and robotics. A lot of the early ideas that worked in AI and robotics came from the AI lab. Those of you that are mathematically inclined, you should know Claude Shannon. He was the one that actually wrote down a formal definition, not for intelligence, but for information. What actually do we mean formally by information? We live in the information age. Turns out you can formally define it, and that paved the way for telecommunications and then for the internet. Herb Simon focused on the Nobel Prize in economics. If you're interested in the history of AI and history of science in general, worth tracking down these names. Okay, how did they do? They worked on this over the summer of 1956. Did they do what they promised to do? Did they create AGI, Artificial General Intelligence, which is more or less what they're describing here? Not quite. Why not? Trust me, these folks are pretty smart. They thought it was going to take them 2 months to make AI. Seems silly in retrospect. If you think about it, it doesn't really seem that hard. Or at least I want you to look at it from the perspective of folks living in 1956. Computers had just been invented. The West had won the war. Technology, nuclear weapons. Technology was moving very, very fast. We've got an approach. All we have to do is actually write down a formal definition of intelligence. We just need to formalize it, and then the rest is kind of straightforward. We'll just write it up as code, and we'll have an intelligent machine. Okay, maybe 1 month is ambitious. 2 months. thinking about thinking is misleading. It's turned out in retrospect that all of the things about intelligence that seem really hard turned out to be easy to implement in code or machines. And the things that seemed really, really easy turned out to be really, really hard. And we're still struggling with them today. What are some examples? What are some things that from a distance seem easy but turn out really hard to code up or make into machines? Or vice versa.
Like creating your own abstraction, your own concepts, rather than being given classifications.
Got it. Here's a bit of the real world, maybe partly digested into data. Form your own abstractions. What are the right categories or ways of dividing up experience that work well for you? The Turing machine, the piece of code, or the machine. Hard for machines to form abstractions on their own. We often have to spoon feed them our abstractions. Here's 1 million photos of cute kitties, and here's 1 million photos of dogs. Learn the difference, right? We're giving the two categories. What are some other things that were relatively easy to create as code that kind of seem intelligent, but are actually really hard for humans to do? What are some of the first successes in AI?
I'm using photos and say like math.
Math and chess. Super hard for most of us, or at least for me. Very hard. Machines, super easy. Grabbing this phone, not so hard for me. Super hard for machines. We're still struggling to create autonomous machines that can pick up a cell phone. Tricky. Thinking about thinking is misleading. Specifically, thinking about which aspects of thinking are easy to implement or hard to implement is not easy to know beforehand. Okay. Just going to pause in our history for a moment. We're going to continue to look at this trajectory. Where were these researchers going? What were they trying to do? What were their goals? Some of them are more biologically inclined. Some folks working in robotics build robots to understand biological intelligence better. Here's a machine that's doing really well at chess, and here's me doing really well at chess. Are we doing the same things? Maybe yes, maybe no. Gives us insight into how we problem solve, form language, use language, and so on. If we can create machines that are also intelligent, maybe in the same way or different from how humans are intelligent, we were going to have a growing set of things that are intelligent. And if we have a growing set of things that are intelligent, maybe we can abstract out of that diverse group general principles. At the moment, if we think about the general principles of intelligent behavior, as you just say, we usually add to that list, use language, do math, do well at chess. That's very anthrocentric, right? That's actually human intelligence. Do all machines that act intelligently have to use language? Do they have to be good at math and chess and writing poetry and so on? Maybe yes, maybe no. If we can start to abstract out the general principles of intelligence, meaning kind of write down a formal definition of what intelligence is, maybe we can go back and build it into machines that act safely and autonomously on our behalf. So here's the biologists, here's the scientists, the philosophers, the psychologists, the neuroscientists, and here's the engineers. Different folks working in AI and robotics have very different goals. Okay, we're out of time for today. You have a quiz due by 11:59 p.m. tonight. I will post the required reading shortly. You're working on assignments 1 and/or 2. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you again Tuesday morning.